Hello everyone. Today I will be giving some first impressions and the first peek really at the upcoming Tier 10 special upgrades. Now for those that aren't aware, Wargaming are adding these special upgrades that can significantly change the way many of the Tier 10 ships play, and I will be previewing and showing off all of them, as well as giving some of my initial thoughts. Now, some important things to note before I start. First of all, these are still works in progress, so subject to change, very much so. Some are in fact still so heavily work in progress that even the tooltips are quite garbled. They're not finished yet, so keep that in mind. Second of all, these are my initial impressions. I haven't had time to test that much, but since people really wanted me to make this, I figured I'd still make it, but I haven't had time to test them as much, so an upgrade that I don't consider that valuable right now might in fact have some special purpose, special niche type of gameplay situation where it actually is very powerful. So keep that in mind as well. Third of all, these upgrades are not meant like the radar upgrades, for example, or the speed boost upgrades that you can only get from special containers and so forth. These are intended as upgrades that you can consciously unlock. In fact, quoting Octavian from Wargaming, I asked him directly before making this commentary because this is something that a lot of people asked me. I can't give the details, but I can tell you that this is not going to be like with special upgrades, and we plan to allow players to consciously unlock them by playing on the corresponding ship. So if you want to unlock the Shema Chasm upgrade, you just play a Shema Chasm. So that is obviously a good solution, since having to rely on RNG crates and stuff to get them would be very frustrating. Right. Let's start off. I'm gonna go through the IGN ships, then I'm gonna go through the Americans, the Russians, and so forth. Basically, as you can see them at the bottom of my screen, that's the order I'm gonna go through the ships. So in case you just want to find your own Tier 10, it should be pretty easy to navigate this. And in fact, if one of you guys want to make timestamps below in the comments, I will probably pin that comment, since those comments are also always very useful. Anyway, starting off, the first special upgrade for the Shema Chasm is Accelerated Torpedo Tubes Reloading. Reduces reload time of torpedo tubes at the expense of decreasing their traverse speed and increasing the risk of being incapacitated. I like this upgrade. I like this upgrade a lot. Now, you gotta consider it's not a raw 25% buff, since this Torpedo Tubes Mod 3 already gives you 15%. So it's actually more like a 10% buff. But the risk of torpedo tubes becoming incapacitated is exactly the same. It's 50% for both of them. So what you're essentially getting is 10% faster torpedo reload at the cost of torpedo tube traverse speed. Now this does actually have an impact, because even when slotting aiming systems mod, which gives you torpedo tube traverse speed, your traverse speed on these tubes is still 30 seconds. And that is actually very slow. Usually you don't notice torpedo tube traverse speed because it's so fast for every single ship. But this upgrade makes it quite slow for this for the Shema Chasm, which means of course in brawling or in close knife fight situations, this can be quite frustrating. Also, if you're trying to turn away and torp at the same time, you're not really able to, because your torp tubes can't keep up with your turns. So this is obviously an upgrade, but it's still one that comes with a cost. I did like it though. I did like that increased reload, because going full reload build, I tested this on PTS with a full build that gives you faster torpedo reload, and this actually allowed me to get the torpedo reload down to 103.3 seconds. Without the upgrade, it's 117 seconds, or using the old upgrade, it's 117 seconds. So it's 14 seconds faster torpedo reload on a pure torpedo boat. So obviously this is a very powerful module, and this is a module that I do intend on using on the Shema Chasm once it comes out, and once I of course manage to unlock it. Moving on, we have the ZA. The ZA one is also very interesting. The ZA one is Enhanced Main Battery and Steering Gears. Improves the accuracy of the main battery guns and extends their firing range, reduces rudder shift time. Once again, this isn't entirely free. You're giving up additional range, because ZAO's default build runs with additional range in pretty much all its configurations. Random battles, competitive, everyone runs the range. So you lose some range, yes. In fact, we can check it just how much. 17.5. If we run this one, we have 18.8. So you're giving up 1.3 kilometers of range. The trade-off is, though, you gain that rudder shift. Rudder shift alone makes this ship so much more comfortable to play at these closer ranges because you have a 4.9 second rudder shift. And that's with stealth module. I tried running it with the steering gears mode 3 with triple rudder shifts. You get the rudder shift down to 2.9 seconds. The problem is having that kind of extreme rudder shift is completely pointless when the turning circle on the ship is 840 meters. So ultimately it was not worth it at all, and the stealth is far more valuable. Still though, you get really good rudder shift, and you get better dispersion, and you don't really give up all your range. So this is one of those that I'm absolutely going to be mounting as well. I don't know if it's going to be as fantastic in competitive, since range is usually a lot more valuable in competitive gameplay, but for solo ranked and just playing random battles, I will absolutely use this. It makes the ZAO more comfortable to play thanks to the faster rudder shift, and it gives you better dispersion. So it's kind of a win-win in that sense. So that's straight up a strong upgrade as well. The Yamato one is amazing. The Yamato one is amazing. I've had time to play it a couple of games, and this one is just straight up amazing. Enhanced main battery guns. Reduces dispersion of shells and reduces reload time of the main battery guns at the expense of decreasing turret traverse speed. Now we gotta consider, normally you run faster reload to begin with, which is already 12% reload and minus 13% turret traverse. By running this one, you still have that same reload, but you lose another 6% of turret traverse. So what this is, the upgrade this actually is you trade 6% turret traverse for minus 7% dispersion, and that is a fantastic trade. That is an absolutely fantastic trade. I mean, your bread and butter on the Yamato is your gun accuracy. You want to land these shells, you want to land these accurate volleys, and this just makes it all the stronger. I can post a commentary, you guys. I played a game with this upgrade and I got like 8 kills and almost 300k damage. Now, obviously you can do that with the Yamato as well, but some of the volleys, some of the dispersion on those volleys was absolutely disgusting, and this is also an upgrade that I will absolutely be mounting. In fact, the IGN upgrades across the board are really, really good. The IGN special upgrades are pretty much all worth equipping. Worth mentioning though is even when running Expert Marksman, you kind of want Yamamoto. You want Yamamoto for that faster turret traverse, because even with running Expert Marksman, if you do slot this upgrade, your turret traverse is 66.1 seconds. So it takes you more than a minute to turn your turrets around. Very, very slow turret traverse, but luckily the Yamato playstyle involves a lot of sitting nose in and not really moving too much, and not really needing to traverse your turrets too much. So it fits the playstyle very, very well, and it just makes the ship stronger. So absolutely a strong upgrade. Finally we have the Hakuryu, the IGN carrier, and this special upgrade is going to be a must-have for any sort of competitive play. Absolute must-have for any sort of competitive play. And that is, of course, enhanced flight control. 15% fighter HP, 5% aircraft cruise speed. Now normally at this point you would probably run Air Groups Mod 3 for increased attack fighter HP. This one is usually considered so across the board, well, it depends. For competitive this sees some use, of course, but this one is just gonna be amazing. Any sort of every single King of the Sea carrier player, any sort of competitive player, even for random battles, people who run air superiority are going to be running this one. This is amazing. 15% fighter health and 5% aircraft cruise speed across the board. So that includes, of course, your dive bombers and torpedo bombers and all of that. So this is just going to be, for competitive players, they're going to grind this as soon as possible. Because if you end up fighting a Hakuryu that has this module slotted while you don't have it slotted, you're probably going to lose every single air battle. So a very important upgrade. And that's the IJN line. Now we're going to be moving on to the USN line. Right, starting off, we have the gearing special upgrade. Now I will warn you, I was a lot less impressed with the American upgrades, but of course that's always going to be my opinion. But let's start it off. The gearing modified hull legendary upgrade reduces the ship's detectability range at the expense of increasing reload time of the main battery guns and torpedo tubes. So you're not actually getting the raw 15% detectability here, because this is in the stealth slot. So this will already gives you 10% concealment and that 5% dispersion increase against anyone shooting your ship. So what this actually gives you is an additional 5% concealment. But that 5% concealment comes at the massive cost of 15% reload and 5% torpedo tube reload time. Considering you're a hybrid DD, and considering, well, mainly gunboat, but the gearing is absolutely a hybrid still, giving up 15% reload and 5% torpedo tube for that 5% concealment, very, very questionable trade. In fact, this is one of those upgrades I wouldn't even use, because most of the time you're not really being spotted by enemy DDs. In competitive, you're never really spotted by enemy DDs. I'm talking about King of the Sea kind of stuff, competitive. You're spotted by enemy radars or planes. But even in random battles, this, with the rendering delay and everything, this seems like such a mediocre trade-off. You can get your concealment down to 5.6, running Stealth Captain and everything. Without it, of course, if you run the normal concealment module, your concealment is 5.9. So we're talking 300 meters of concealment when you already have a competitive concealment at this heavy cost. And ultimately, I don't think it's worth it. This is one of those that I think comes at a too heavy a cost to be worth using, and I would probably not even bother running this upgrade. Wooster, this upgrade is actually pretty interesting, and this is an upgrade that I can see use for in both randoms and in competitive. And the idea is, once again, you can see that, of course, as I mentioned at the start of this commentary, these upgrades are works in progress. What this means, though, is that it increases the duration of your radar, your defensive AA, and your hydro. So this basically boosts all your upgrades significantly. And if you combine this with the radar duration module that you probably already would be running in any sort of competitive environment, you can get some really absurd things, like 61.6 second radar duration. Now, do remember that this goes in the concealment slot, but if you're divisioning with a teammate, like you got smokes available, or you're just playing behind islands, as you usually would in the Wooster, like hiding behind rocks and just lobbing shells over the island, then having access to 48 second AA, 61.6 second defensive radar, and an additional, 120 seconds of hydro, that's pretty damn strong. Normal hydro is of course 100 seconds, so you just gain a flat out 20 seconds on top. So this upgrade, while a bit more situational, since you are giving up concealment, you can still get very good concealment on the ship. I mean, if we go, let me quickly spec this guy, just to show you guys. It's not, because the Wooster doesn't necessarily require the concealment. It helps, it absolutely helps, but it's absolutely not something that it has to have to live. We can get 10.6 km concealment without running the concealment module. 10.6 is more than enough to be able to get into good aggressive positions, and also plenty enough to be able to disengage. So this is this enhanced countermeasures, this upgrade is very interesting. It is a trade-off, but it's a powerful trade-off. And this is one I can absolutely see myself using, because it makes you a powerhouse more than you already are when it comes to these consumables. And in competitive, this one is absolutely going to prove popular, because that radar time, that's 61.6 seconds the enemy cannot cap the objective while you're sitting there radaring it. So very strong one. The Des Moines one, on the other hand, not so strong. Now, the idea with the Des Moines one is enhanced propulsion. It reduces the rudder shift time and time to full power when accelerating, at the expense of reducing the surveillance radar cost time. So what they're trying to make you do is to be able to play the Des Moines better in the open. Now, if you're playing for competitive, like clan battles, I wouldn't really, I would never see this being used in King of the Sea type, but in clan battles, for example, when you're pushing aggressively with the Des Moines, if you're pushing a flank with a huge cruiser force, having this on the Des Moines might be okay for the rudder shift, because you could get it down to 5.5 seconds, but you're either trading range or reload, and you're getting rudder shift, which is pretty useful, and the acceleration, which is debatably useful, because people need to remember that the acceleration module only works when you from a full stop to about 6 knots. That's when it's most effective. Other than that, it's pretty useless across the board. So, very. Normally, the Moines is played by hiding behind islands. Much like the Worcester, you play it in very stationary positions, you hide behind islands and you lob shells over the islands. That is the standard Des Moines playstyle. That is how the ship works. It doesn't really have the armor to sail around in the open, and not the small size or in general you don't really play it in the open. It also doesn't have the shell arcs, the shell velocity, to be able to sit at long range and spam like Zhao and Henry and ships like these. So that's why you tend to get into cover, and this kind of counters I understand the idea of the upgrade is to encourage this kind of open water gameplay. The problem is, I don't think even with this upgrade I would ever want to play the Des Moines in the open, because that's playing against its strengths. And trading this radar, I mean, if you don't run the radar module, you're down to 36 seconds. If you do run it, let's slot the radar module here. We do have a 50-second radar, which is already really impressive. I mean, 50-second radar is nothing to scoff at, very strong, but it's still a trade-off. Ultimately though, it's not the reduction in radar duration that bothers me with this upgrade. It's the fact that you're either trading off range, which is a lot of utility, especially on bad maps, or you're just trading off pure DPM. And I don't think this upgrade is worth either trade. That's really what it comes down to. Other people might disagree, we'll see. I will have time to test that later on. I haven't had time to test this ship at all, so I will have to return to that one. Finally, the last USN ship, oh sorry, no, we still have Midway, my bad. The Montana upgrade. And the Montana upgrade is honestly just as lackluster. First of all, you're trading off concealment. And one of the strengths of the Montana is that you can actually get pretty damn good concealment on this ship. So you're giving up the concealment in return to get, well, fire extinguishing time, 10%. That's pretty nice. Flooding recovery time, that's pretty okay. Ultimately though, if you have to eat the flood, the difference between eating a full flood and that minus 10% is pretty irrelevant, because more than likely your damage con will come up or you will die before that minus 10% actually has any sort of impact. Rudder shift time, 30 seconds. Okay, so we can get a 15.5. If we run both rudder shift modules, I think we can get it down to something like 12 seconds. But if you run this one, then you're kind of trading off all the bonuses you just got from this, which is flooding and fire extinguishing time. So probably not really worth using that one. But in this case, still the 30% rudder shift, it's nice, sure. But when you have a 950 meter turning circle and you only do 30 knots, this rudder shift difference isn't really that valuable. You still handle like a brick. The only reason I could see for this is like, if torps are spotted, it gives you a bit more reaction time to turn into the torps. But ultimately, rudder shift time on a battleship is pretty useless. Unless you get it to very extreme values. And most of the time you're playing this angled fairly, I wouldn't say stationary when it's Montana, but you shouldn't really be caught in positions where you need the rudder shift, is what I'm trying to say. Steering gear's repair time is of course completely useless. The only time you use lose your steering gears in the Montana is if you eat a torpedo in the stern. That's the only time you will lose your steering gear in this thing. And if you're running this module with faster rudder shift time, then hopefully you would never even need it. So it's kind of countering itself when it comes to that to begin with. I'm really not a fan of this upgrade, because the only thing that I really like about this upgrade is the reduced fire extinguishing time bonus. The problem is though, you're giving up concealment to get it. So if you do our default, let's do a default Montana build here, or let me just get my stealth build. The whole idea, the reason why people run concealment expert on the Montana is because, well, it is a fairly stealthy battleship. You can get it down to 13.4 kilometers of stealth. The problem is, if you don't run the stealth module, you got a 14.9 kilometers stealth. And that's a what, 1.5 kilometers of additional HE spam you will be eating. additional AP spam, additional everything, additional torps, additional everything. So the 10% reduction in fire extinguishing time is not worth the raw amount of damage you will eat by not having access to this additional concealment. Also, one of the Montana's strengths is you sneak around with that great concealment, and then you pop out a stealth and you blap some cruiser who's giving you broadside. So you're also trading off that. So ultimately, my initial impressions of this enhanced damage control system is that I think it's pretty underwhelming. And it's probably a module I wouldn't use. That's really as simple as it is. That's kind of been the theme of many of these American upgrades. It's a module I would not use. It's not a bad module, but it's not as good as the other module in comparison. Of course, you gotta remember, concealment system also offers you +5 dispersion on any shells shooting you. But still, the trade-off is bad, in my opinion, of course. And finally we have Midway, the last American ship, and this one gives you reinforced armor protection for attack air groups. Now, it's a 15% upgrade over Air Groups Mod 3, but it costs you 5% aircraft cruise speed. For random battles, I would say this is monstrously strong. For, I would say, potato midways, I think this is also monstrously strong. I mean, for good players it's also going to be good, but for the average left click auto drop AP bomber, this is going to be huge, because, well, 15% health is like gaining another tier and a half of health, of tankiness for the planes. So this one is obviously going to be very popular. Faraseleth did say something, I did hear him say something about this 5% aircraft cruise speed is actually a pretty big deal though, especially against enemy Hakuryus. Apparently, if you do run this, some of your planes that could otherwise outrun the Hakuryu do end up getting caught. So even this upgrade that I at first glance thought was quite good, more experienced carrier players are saying that it's probably not even worth using. That remains to be seen, but it's possible it's more of a random battle kind of thing, and against any sort of good player you're going to be struggling if you run it, which is of course a bit of a shame. So for the American line, the only module I'm really interested in is the Worcester one. The rest are kinda eh. Moving on, of course, we have the Russian ships, or the Russian modules. The Kaba module is one that I have been experimenting with, and it's one that I don't really consider that good. The Kaba one is called Weighted Artillery. Let me slot this one in. Weighted Artillery gives you 8% range, 6% main battery loading time, minus 13% traverse speed. The minus 13% traverse speed is of course not that big of a deal because your turret traverse is so amazingly good on a destroyer. Ultimately, it looks like a really good upgrade. You're like, wow, range and reload on a Kaba on a gunboat? It boosts your 13.5 km range to 14.6. The problem is it makes you a lot less flexible, because what you're replacing is Steering Gears Mod 3. Steering Gears Mod 3 became practically a necessity on the Kaba ever since they nerfed the rudder shift. Because if you don't run Steering Gears Mod 3, you have an 8.9 second rudder shift. This is worse than this is worse than a lot of cruisers, this rudder shift. And considering you want to kind of be darting in, you don't want to be sitting at that 14 kilometer range the entire time. You want to also be scouting, harassing, chasing down enemy ships and so forth. And this clumsiness is very, very rough to deal with. I played with it. My initial impressions is that you lose so much flexibility running Weighted Artillery over Steering Gears mod. That is really the biggest downside. Giving up all this rudder shift is a huge trade-off. And initial impressions was that it wasn't really that good. What this could be useful for is if you run smoke build Kaba. If instead of running the heal build Kaba, you opt to choose for a smoke build Kaba, then this upgrade might actually be quite good. Because, I mean, it's raw DPM, it's raw gun range, which means if you don't have to actively dodge shells, you're sitting in a smoke, then it can be quite valuable. Ultimately, though, I do consider heal Kaba to be significantly stronger than smoke Kaba, and because, well, one of the great strengths of heal Kaba is that you draw a lot of fire. You draw a lot of potential damage away from your teammates towards yourself when they struggle to hit you, because they ultimately they do have to shoot you because you're so annoying. So this upgrade has been a question mark. I'm initially leaning towards not really wanting to use it, because I don't think the 1.1 km range is enough to basically make you insanely clumsy. And if you're forced into any situation where you actually have to close the distance, like you have to go help your DDs in a cap or you have to go support somewhere, you have such a hard time dodging shells. And with Battleship AP being what it is against destroyers, not being able to dodge shells isn't really that fun. So initial impressions of this one is very eh. Very eh. It might be okay for certain playstyles, but ultimately so far I've been preferring steering gears. I will be testing it some more and maybe you can make it work, but the difference between not running this one and running this one is 8.9 second rudder shift versus 5.3 second rudder shift. And that's a pretty damn big difference. Grozovoi. The Grozovoi upgrade is recoilless main battery guns, which gives you 18% faster reload at the cost of 7% turret reverse speed and 10% longer torpedo reload. Now, compared to the normal one you run in this slot, which is of course the main battery one, it's 12 and 13. So you're actually gaining 6% reload and slightly faster turret reverse. But of course on these DDs, the turret reverse is pretty much pointless. It doesn't really matter. It's already so fast. So what you're essentially gaining is 6% gun reload at the cost of 10% torpedo reload. And I actually quite like this upgrade. It's not straightforward. Wow, that's a huge upgrade. Because Grozovoi torps, the 10 km torps, they're not awful. 10 km range, 65 knots. They're not amazing. They have a really long reload time, but they're pretty okay. So losing 10% reload on those means that of course it takes absolutely ages to use them. But this build is very good for gunboat Grozovoi. And gunboat Grozovoi builds are of course the strongest builds, I would say. And this pretty much directly buffs those pure gunboat approaches. So this is one I would absolutely see myself using. Because, well, Grozovoi guns are kind of its bread and butter. And smoking up and just ducka-ducking, this is a perfect upgrade for that kind of build. So Grozovoi upgrade seems pretty good. Pretty good. Not something amazing, but not a bad upgrade at all either. It's a bit of a trade-off, but I would say it's a good trade-off. Moskva upgrade. This one is a eh. Once again, eh. Weighted main battery guns. Minus 11% maximum dispersion. 8% firing range, and it costs you a turret reverse. First impression, holy shit, that's really good. And it is a pretty nice upgrade. I've been using it. I've been having some really good games. But then one guy asked me, is it really worth giving up the concealment to use it, considering in order to be effective with this upgrade, you have to sit much further back than you do with the stealth upgrade. And I thought that was a very good point, because our concealment with this, let's put a camo on, otherwise this is misleading. Don't worry about, I'm on a press account, so don't worry about the doubloons. I have 200,000, so I don't care. So right now we're sitting at, let's get rid of this, with 15.4 km concealment. And if we do slot this one, we can get down to a 13.8. Now 13.8 isn't good concealment by any means, but 15.4 is awful. And when you're playing a cruiser, every battleship loves shooting at you whenever you're anywhere in the open. And trying to push into any sort of advantageous positions becomes so much harder when you're spotted 1.6 kilometers out, further than you would normally. So I like this upgrade. I initially liked it, but the cost is questionable. I won't go straight out the way and say this is straight up better. The volleys I got with this minus 11% dispersion, I made sure to slot the second dispersion module as well instead of AA, which you normally tend to slot, just to see what kind of dispersion I got. And some of those Moskva volleys were absolutely disgusting. If you watched my stream yesterday, you saw just how stupidly accurate those volleys were. I'm of course going to be testing all of this more today, but it was amazing. And being able to get a 21 km firing range while running the reload module is also pretty amazing, but it comes at a cost. This is an upgrade that comes at a significant cost, and the question is this cost worth it or not is very hard at this point to decide. And in a way I like this upgrade because of that, because it's one of those that Depends on playstyle, depends on situation, depends on map. One might be better than the other, and so forth. So it's worth looking into. Note though that main battery traverse speed is really garbage when you run both of these, because both of these nerf your turret traverse speed, so you actually end up, even with, I think I respect expert marksman just to help alleviate the problem, and you still have a 30-second turret traverse. So your turret traverse obviously pays heavily for this build, but it is pretty fun. Those railgun shells, like, I landed triple citadel on a Des Moines from 20 kilometers. It is very satisfying to run this module. But is it actually straight up better than the concealment? Not that easy of a call to make. Not that easy of a call to make, because you struggle to disengage. And if you want to turn the Moskva around, this is a big ship with a big citadel. If you want to turn the ship around, you want to be undetected while doing it. And the problem, because otherwise this is how much citadel you have to be shot at. And the problem is getting undetected while trying to turn with a 15.4 km concealment. Not an easy task. Very challenging, in fact. So, more testing required before I can give you guys any sort of final opinion on this one. But, I mean, of course, you can form your own opinions. For some will love it, some will think it's trash. And that's usually the sign of a pretty well balanced upgrade to me. And then, next we have the German upgrades. The German upgrade is interesting. I've had time to test it a bit, and I thought it was pretty okay. The German upgrade is called Low Profile Torpedo Tubes, which gives you minus 5% concealment and 10% faster reload. Now note that this is replacing the concealment module. So what you're essentially giving up is 5% dispersion of shells, incoming shells, and 5% concealment. In return though, you get 10% faster torpedo reload. With full stealth build and running this one, your concealment is 6.4. If you run the default concealment module, it's 6.1. And this is a pretty critical range, because when you have 6.1 concealment, you can kind of just push in, and if you get spotted you can use Hydra, which has 5.9 km range. You can use Hydra to spot the enemy player. So they only have a 200 meter buffer, so more than likely if you get spotted, your Hydra will counter spot them, which is of course the strength of that, because it was a recent, they buffed this ship used a 6.4 km concealment, but they buffed it to 6.1 to make it more competitive, because it was considered too weak with 6.4, which makes this module very interesting, because it nerfs it right back to 6.4 concealment and makes it very questionable. In fact, not having this forced me to spec into RPF, because now there's a 500 meter buffer before my Hydra picks up the enemy. But I've still kinda liked it, but I'm not sure how good it is. I liked it because now when you go full torpedo reload build, including the captain perk for torpedo reload and AR, you can get some absolutely absurd torpedo reload time. The torpedo reload is 62 seconds, and when AR kicks in, it easily goes below a minute. So we are launching full sets of torps on a tier 10 destroyer every minute, every single minute. And these are of course very fast torpedoes at 69 knots, and it's quite fun to play. But this torpedo power does come at a trade. Contesting caps, fighting enemy DDs becomes significantly more difficult, because, well, this is a very clumsy destroyer. It's big, it's clumsy, it's got a massive turning circle. The speed is okay. I mean, this is with a speed flag, you gotta remember that. This is with a speed flag 39.4. So, this is a trade. This is straight up a trade. You give up a lot of contesting and fighting power on the Z52 to gain a bit more torpedo power. Questionable. For competitive, I would probably never run this. For competitive, I would absolutely always go concealment, simply because you can't give up that knife fighting power, that contesting power, and the ability to bully other DDs. I don't think you can give that up. For random battles, it's pretty fun. It's pretty fun. Being a torpedo spamming monster is pretty fun to play. Just like with the Shema Chasm, just being able to spam more torps is a lot more fun to play. So, a questionable upgrade. I will have to play it a bit more to form my opinion, but as of right now, this is more of a random battle one and less of a try-hard one. Hindenburg upgrade is pretty insane. Hindenburg upgrade, well, people tend to joke about Battleship Hindenburg, and this new upgrade, well, it really plays to that stereotype. Enhanced Repair Party. Reduces the main battery repair time by 50%. reduces fire extinguishing time by 50%, reduces flooding recovery time by 70%, and gives you rudder shift. Now, worth noting is that this replaces concealment, kind of like this similar one on the Montana did. I mean, it's kind of silly that when you compare the Montana one to this one, this is for the battleship, 10%, 10%, and then you look at this one, and it's like 50%, 50%. I'm sorry, because this one, trading's concealment for this upgrade is actually a pretty worthwhile upgrade, because you become stupidly tanky running this. I'm running rudder shift module, and just by running the flag and run the reduced fire flag and basics of survivability, fires last less than 10 seconds. If you get set on fire with this module, fires burn for less than 10 seconds. People thought I was damage conning fires, so they saw the fire, the burn, and then it disappeared, and they thought I damage con, so they really tried to like spam me even more. But you don't even need to damage con the fires; they just extinguish. I mean, you can obviously make this more extreme by running this, but I don't think you really want to do that. It is an option though. You gotta consider running this one is an option, because the 20% rudder shift you lose, you have actually regained by running this module. So if you run this on top as well, now you have default rudder shift. This is the rudder shift you have on live, except you're practically immune to both flooding and fire. So I'm gonna be testing this a lot more today on stream, but my initial impressions of this build has been, holy shit. Like, you are immune to fire and flooding. You can eat the torpedo, and you don't need to damage con the flooding, because the flooding runs out so stupidly quickly. And same thing with fires. With this build, I mean, what do you got? 7-8 second fires? Something like that. You can ignore them. You're immune to all dot damage. So Battleship Hindenburg just became even more of a battleship. And I can absolutely see this module being used on in any sort of competitive. Yes, you give up concealment. So you got 13.7 km concealment, but if you're putting Hindenburgs to push a flank, for example, you want to push some side, or you have aggressive Hindenburg players, running this module on an aggressive Hindenburg player is huge. I mean, one of the main counters to Hindenburgs in competitive is Zaus, because Zaus are so good at burning and damaging them. Well, this one just completely made you immune to a huge part of that Zao damage. So this one is fantastic, and this one will absolutely see use. It is a trade-off once again, but unlike the Montana trade-off, which I thought was pretty shabby, this trade-off is huge, especially since it gives that rudder shift which allows you to slot double damage controls, well, double type of reductions. We'll need to do more testing today. I will be testing today on stream, but initial impressions, holy shit, this is a powerful upgrade. Große Kurfürst, the upgrade is enhanced main armaments. Main battery loading time 15%, secondary battery loading time 10%, main battery firing range -8, traverse speed -7. Now normally you would run the reload mod in this slot, so 12 and 13. So what you're actually gaining here is a bit more turret traverse, a bit more reload, but you're giving up a good chunk of range. Now, for most tier 10 battleships, giving up range isn't that big of an issue, but Große Kurfürst already struggles by having very, very short range compared to the others. So when you slot this one, you're actually down to 19 kilometers of range, and this is pretty damn low at tier 10. Especially for the Große Kurfürst, because you struggle really getting close, so a lot of the time you end up having to lob shells from quite a distance away. So this makes it questionable. It's a questionable. The 10% secondary battery loading time is kind of pointless, because, well, generally you don't want to be running secondary build at tier 10s because it has so many weaknesses. It's more of a fun meme build than actually a competitive build. So the trade-off is pretty rough. I'm not entirely sure it's worth it. For pure, like, people who run secondary and brawling builds, I think they're gonna love this one. If you run secondary Kurfürst, then you're gonna love this upgrade, because it just makes your build stronger in every single way. So this was fantastic, but for competitive builds that usually run more tank-focused Große Kurfürst, this one is questionable. 3% reload for -8% range on an already ranged challenge battleship. It's a rough trade-off, and remains to be seen. I have to test it a bit more.
but initial impressions have been debatable. It's more of a side grade than an upgrade. And that's perfectly fine. Not everything needs to be as insane as the Hindenburg module, but it's worth keeping in mind that initial impressions, eh. For secondary Grosskorfust, hey! And then of course we have the Royal Navy. Only 2 ships in the Royal Navy. First we have the Minotaur one. Now this is pretty interesting. Okay, this one might be a bit confusing. This is Enhanced Smoke Generator. Decreases the accuracy of the enemy firing at your ship, reduces the ship's detectability range, and increases the action time of the smoke generator at the expense of reducing the smoke screen dispersion time. So what exactly does this mean? Well, first of all, this goes in the concealment slot. So you're losing 5% concealment, but you gain 5% additional dispersion of ships firing upon you. But that's a trade-off you need to remember. That's a pretty important trade-off. Now, what exactly does this do? Well, let's actually go to concealment first so I can show you the default smoke. The default smoke on the Minotaur, it blooms for 15 seconds. Blooms action time means when you use the consumable and it starts puffing out smoke. That lasts for 15 seconds. That's the time you have to stop your ship and park inside your smoke, because then that's not going to be generating any more smoke clouds. And smoke screen dispersion time is how long that smoke will last after being generated. So now that we understand how this works, this upgrade becomes more clear. What this upgrade actually does is that 15-second action time becomes a 37.5 second action time. So this means that you can actually make these huge, massive smoke clouds. Obviously, for any sort of team, if you play in a division, this is pretty huge. Well, even in random battles, like the amount of smoke you can put out, this is 37 seconds of smoke time that you can just bloom across the map. You can make a huge goddamn smoke cloud. But once again, we're paying for it. That 113 second smoke duration gets nerfed to 96 seconds. That's of course that minus 15% smoke dispersion time. So this one is needs to be tested. It's interesting. It's also, once again, I would say it's a side grade. I wouldn't call it a direct upgrade for the current one. You got to remember we're also giving up some concealment to use it. So debatable. Interesting though. I haven't tested this one, so I'm not going to comment that much more on it. I'll leave you guys to theorize on what exactly you could do with it. But it must be kept in mind that 37.5 seconds is a very long smoke time. It's even longer than the gearing smoke time. The gearing action time is 30 seconds, and that's already huge. So this is a very, very long action time on any sort of smoke. So absolutely needs to be tested, needs to be experimented with, and I think you can possibly even sneak up pretty close. Like you can park behind an island, you can start smoking, and then you can slowly crawl at a quarter speed into a capture point without ever being detected, because the smoke conceals your movement. So there are some interesting options available with this module. Whether it's worth slotting, we'll have to get back to that. The Conqueror upgrade is pretty interesting as well. The Conqueror upgrade replaces concealment, but the Conqueror already has very good concealment, so even with giving this up, if you run the normal stealth build, you still have a 13.1 kilometer stealth concealment, which means you have better concealment than any other tier 10 battleship and some cruisers. Still though, the enhanced engineering systems increases main battery turret reverse speed, reduces rudder shift time, and decreases steering gear's repair time. Once again, steering gear's repair time is kinda debatable, only really valuable if you get torped in the stern in a battleship. But what's interesting here is that rudder shift time, minus 40%. Now, I played a bit of a meme build here, where instead of slotting the normal damage control, I actually slotted double rudder shift, and you can see that I have an 8.3 second rudder shift. And that's actually better rudder shift than you have on many cruisers. However, as I mentioned earlier, having an amazing rudder shift on a battleship isn't really that amazing, simply because your turning circle is so massive. If you expect to have, with this incredibly fast rudder shift, to be able to turn on a hairpin, that's not going to happen. In general, having a smaller turning circle is more valuable than having a fast rudder shift on a battleship. So this rudder shift is nice. It allows you to dodge incoming torps very, very quickly since your ship responds quite fast. But even when it responds fast, it still turns so very slow that it takes it a time to actually go in the position you wanted to, regardless of how fast your rudder is behaving. So, interesting, absolutely worth trying. You give up concealment, which is pretty great, but you are able to juke and dodge incoming stuff much better. The problem is, of course, in a battleship, when you trade off concealment, is that one of the great strengths of having good concealment on a battleship is that you sneak up close, you catch some guy giving you full broadside, and you absolutely punish the living hell out of him by popping out a stealth. And the strength of... let me actually get some credits. I'm out of credits. Let's trade off 10k doubloons. Don't do this on your live accounts, boys. The thing is, you trade off 11.8 concealment. And 11.8 concealment is so good because you're outspotting a lot of cruisers, and it makes it so terrifying when you come around a corner or suddenly a Conqueror pops up at 12 kilometers and just blaps you. That's terrifying to deal with. And giving up that terrifying strength for the rudder shift, just like with the Minotaur upgrade, I need to test this some more. I haven't made up my mind on this upgrade. It's interesting, but I don't see it as that kind of raw, amazing upgrade as some others. It needs more testing. Then we have the Yu Yang. The Yu Yang upgrade is also pretty interesting. What the Yu Yang upgrade does is enhanced armaments. Reduces reload time of the main battery guns and torpedo tubes at the expense of decreasing the smokescreen dispersion time and surveillance radar action time. Now, we just covered smokescreen dispersion. It's of course how long the smokescreen lasts after being deployed. And of course, this one gives minus 30% to both radar and smokescreen. So if you try to run this one, even if you run surveillance radar mod, let's see, how long will our... well, first of all, our smokescreen dispersion time is 49 seconds. So you have a 50-second smoke. It's enough to get a cap, as long as you don't get reset. But if you get reset, then it's going to be nasty. The radar, though, 19.6 second radar. Youch. That is a very short radar duration. On the other hand, though, you do gain 10% reload and 10% torpedo power. This is a questionable trade. I might see myself running this in random battles. Because just having 10% gun power and 10% torps would be quite nice. But for competitive play, where especially clan battles or even tier 10 ranked, where that radar is so stupidly strong, that's a pretty nasty trade. 30% is pretty nasty, especially considering we are giving up concealment to use it. That's the other... yeah, actually, sorry, I didn't even consider you're giving up concealment. Yeah, I probably wouldn't run this. I'm sorry, I didn't even consider that we're giving up concealment to use it. Wow. Yeah, I wouldn't run that module. I'm sorry, but already giving up 10% concealment and that dispersion increase on any incoming shells, giving up that for the 10% reload and 10% torp reload, that would already be a pretty hard sell for me. Giving that up and also losing 30% radar duration or 30% smoke, yeah, that's a bit of a too steep price for me. I do not think I'd be running this one. This is one of those upgrades I think I'd straight up just not gonna bother. 10% is not that big. It's like speccing BFT or speccing torpedo reload, except now you lose one of your greatest strengths, which is your great concealment. Yeah. That's gonna be a no for me on that one. Maybe I'll change my mind, but as I said, I haven't finalized. I won't say that any of my opinions are finalized, but initial impressions on this one, yeah, how about no? The Henry one is amazing. The Henri upgrade is absolutely amazing. It replaces concealment / rudder shift, depending on how you decide to play the Henri, but it's so good. Increased firing elevation of artillery. 8% reload, 8% range, 12% reload, but it costs you 10% concealment. So this is for the pure gunboat Henry. So with this you can go double reload modules, and this of course means that, well, I can show you guys if you the default range. Let's go Let's spec range, and let's spec concealment here. The default reload on the Henry is 12.3. But when you sort both of these, you can actually get it down to a pretty impressive 9.5 second reload. And of course, since this module already gives you range, you're still sitting at 20.6 km range, which is excellent. But now you have a 9.5 second reload on your guns. And this has been fun. Holy crap, this has been fun to play. Obviously you need to go steering gears as well here, but everyone goes that on a cruiser regardless. Your concealment is absolute garbage. This is 15.5 concealment, and this is with concealment expert spec. Your concealment is complete garbage. But for flanking and random battles and just general like ducka gameplay, considering with the Henry you want to be shooting the entire time. Kind of like with the Kaba, you want to be shooting all the time. This pure gunboat build has been so much fun to play. Is it going to be that good in competitive? I don't know. Not being able to get undetected is obviously a huge issue in competitive play, but man, this pure firepower that you have with this build, it's so much fun. Because one of the big downsides of the Henry has been the very long reload on the guns, and now when you're suddenly playing sub 10 second reload, and of course add in the French captain with the better AR, and once AR kicks in, we're talking about approaching Des Moines reload times. Well, not quite, I mean 8 second reload. Still, we're on the Henry guns. It's fun. I love that upgrade. I love it. Might not be the optimal one for competitive, or it actually might. I don't know. But it's very strong, and most importantly, it's insanely fun to play. So this one kind of reinvigorated my interest in the Henry, which I considered quite a boring ship. But when you get to experience the increased ducka power, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, absolutely. Another ship, well, both the French ships have really good upgrades in my opinion. The other interesting one is the Republic one. Additional loader for the main battery guns. Note that this is replacing the main battery mod 3, the faster reload. So what you're actually getting is 6% faster reload at the cost of 6% slower turret traverse and minus 16% firing range. Now the Republic firing range is already so good that losing that huge chunk isn't really that big of a deal. You still have 21.9 kilometers, which has been proven to be more than enough as I've been testing it. In return though, you have 19.7 second reload. Once again, add in the French captain with AR, and you're running around with Scharnhorst reload on the Republic, except you're firing these 431mm shells with 2.0 Sigma. I like it. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. That just more ducka power. I don't really need the firing range. That's perfectly fine. The traverse speed with expert marksman you still have 37.9, so it's nothing like the Yamato or something similar. Both these upgrades is pure gunpowder upgrades on a Henry and the Republic. They have been just a ton of fun, and this one I could easily be using competitive gameplay as well, because well, it's just raw firepower. And 19.7 second reload is disgusting DPM for a battleship, even if you only have 8 guns. So those were all the upgrades, all the special tier 10 upgrades. Stalingrad doesn't have one as of yet, so I skipped it. This vid ended up being absolutely massive. Holy Jesus. If one of you makes as I mentioned at the beginning, if one of you makes a comment with where the timestamps for all the ships are, I will pin that comment, since for the average player to navigate to find their ships might otherwise be a bit cumbersome. Anyway, this was the first look, first impressions. Keep in mind, these are subject to change. My opinions are subject to change. Everything is subject to change. But I hope you guys enjoyed this preview, this sneak peek anyways, and I will talk to you guys later.